Welcome back, everybody. I hope you all are caffeinated and happy, and you also tasted the great cookies from KBR. In this second session of the conference, Wanted Social Media Data, Archiving Practices and Research Use, we will present you with the most important results of the BESOCIAL research project. But before starting this presentation, I would like to present and introduce you to this amazing interdisciplinary team. On the left from me, I have Pieter HEYVAERT from Ghent University. I have Lise-Anne from University of Namur, Eva ROLIN from UC Louvain, Delia BUDULAN, also from UC Louvain, Sophie VANDEPONTSEELE, our Head of Contemporary Collections at the Royal Library of Belgium at KBR. And then at the end, we have Eveline VLASSENROOT from MICT at Ghent University. And normally I should see a presentation now, but I can only see a screen. So can we quickly switch to the presentation if possible? Okay. I will switch myself to the agenda of today. So today we will start with an introduction of the BESOCIAL, what it actually entails, what the objectives are, what the work packages are, and after that we'll move on to the legal framework, where Lise-Anne will talk about the issues of social media archiving, but also on giving access to the data in the context of the legal framework. And after that I will switch to the selection scope, where I talk about BESOCIAL corpus. And then I think it's to Eva and Pieter, who will talk about the technical issues that we had and also how we solved this during the BESOCIAL project. And after that, we'll move to Eveline, who will explain a bit more about the user requirements. And then the access session will be explained by Eva and Delia, and they will talk about the interface. And then at the end, Sophie and I will conclude everything and also look at the next steps of social media archiving within the walls of KBR. But first, start with an introduction. So, as you can see from this graph, and especially on the right, social media is neither new nor unknown. And as you can see, the amount of hours people spend on social media has tremendously increased over the past years. And in 2021, a person used their social media per day for 2 hours and 27 minutes, which I think is immense. And over the past decades, the output of social media, being big data, has become one of the major sources for conducting qualitative and quantitative research. But yeah, besides from that, in addition to collecting social media solely for research purposes, we also see a trend that international libraries and national libraries and cultural institutions are also finding their way to archiving social media and web archiving. And BESOCIAL is one of these projects that gave social media archiving a chance within KBR. So what is BESOCIAL exactly? What is a research project? It's a 2-year research project that started in the summer of 2020 during COVID, and it's funded by BELSPO, the Belgian Science Policy Office, and coordinated by KBR, the Royal Library of Belgium. And today, the 15th of September, the project ends. And the aim of the project is to really provide a sustainable strategy for archiving and preserving social media in Belgium. And the objectives within the projects were to first analyze and review the state of the art of social media archiving, and there we knocked on different doors of different institutions to see how they go about social media archiving and to really see how they do it and learn from their expertise. The second objective was to prepare and set up a pilot project for social media archiving and to make the social media archive accessible within a pilot. And then the last, and also maybe most important one, was to make recommendations for sustainable social media archiving in federal Belgium. So of course, KBR, the Royal Library of Belgium, is not carrying out this project alone. As you can see at the number of presenters present here today, we have an amazing interdisciplinary team behind us from different universities across Belgium, from Ghent University, UC Louvain, Université de Namur, and all of these give us advice on the legal level, the technical level, and also the user requirements level. And I also want to give short credits to the team working behind the scenes today. So credits to Friedel Gerard, Julie Birkels, Sally Chambers, Pieter Méchant, Patrick Watrin, Alejandra Michel, and Cécile Terwange. Thank you very much for helping behind the scenes today. So for the BESOCIAL project, we worked in different work packages, 7 to be correct, and the first one was to analyze the state-of-the-art of social media archiving, and as I said, to knock on different doors of existing social media archiving initiatives. A second work package was called Preparation for Pilot for Social Media Archiving, and here we examined several feasibility studies to see what is technical feasible, what tools are the most interesting for us, to also look at the user requirements and also the functional and technical requirements, and to go further to the third work package, which was the pilot for social media archiving, where we really focused on archiving the data, looked at the quality of the data, controlled the quality, and also created a preservation plan based on the OAIS model, the Open Archival Information System model. And the fourth work package was more focusing on the access side, so we created a mock-up pilot interface for that, where we also looked at the needs for that interface. And the fifth one is mainly a work package that focused on giving recommendations to the public, but also internally. And there we, for example, created a cost calculation plan, also business model, and also other reports. And then throughout the project, we also had 2 other work packages, the first one being the dissemination, valorization, so see that as the articles that we wrote, the presentations that we did, the conferences that we attended, etc. And then the last one was the help desk for legal inquiries, where we asked our legal partner questions if we had them, and they answered them in a very comprehensible manner to us in a Q&A format, which was really nice and really helpful to have. So this was a bit of a recap of the BESOCIAL project. I would like now to give the floor and the word to Lise-Anne, who will explain more about the legal framework of social media archiving and also of giving access to that data and how this legally works.
Thank you, Fien. So I'm going to talk about the legal framework that is applicable to social media archiving. So I won't go into too much detail of legal theory. I will try to give you more of the practical recommendations we gave during the BESOCIAL project. So there are a few legal fields to take into account when considering to archive social media content. Mainly, we have privacy issues, personal data protection and the GDPR, and copyright matters. So there are also other legal fields, but I will focus on the main ones here today. Here I will give you recommendations by dividing them between the main stages of social media archiving. So first of all, selection, then preservation, and finally, access. So to start with selection, and so the recommendations related to privacy. So as you are aware, there are a lot of private information on social media, and sometimes people's right to privacy over the content they publish on social media can be conflicting with the right to information of the public to access those information. So the right to information derives from the freedom of speech, and so it is our right to access some information with high value, and it is our work for the archives to give access to such information. So in this case, when we have a conflict between privacy and the right to information, we have to balance these two fundamental rights because they are of equal value. And the method to balance them in each case is to apply some criteria the balancing exercise to determine if, in some case, the right to privacy prevails or the right to information. Here, the recommendations are meant to ensure that the content we will select on social media will more make the balance lean towards the right to information rather than the right to privacy in order to avoid too much privacy issues. So first, the selection policy should focus on content which contributes to the general interest because it is of high informative value. Next, the selection policy should focus on content made by or about public figures because the right to privacy is a bit less extended as they are in the public eye. And finally, the selection policy should avoid private information about private individuals who did not post the content themselves. Again, because when someone posts information about themselves, their privacy is a bit reduced because they themselves put those information in the public. But it's not the case if those information are about other people. Next, we have recommendations for personal data protection, so related to the GDPR, because again, there are a lot of personal data on social media. So thankfully, the KBR benefits from a derogatory regime applicable to archiving practices because it is a public institution. And so it avoids a lot of obligations, principle, and data subjects' rights from the GDPR. But it still has to respect several other obligations and principles, and also has to give appropriate safeguards to compensate the fact that it doesn't have to respect other data subjects' rights. One very important principle that has to be kept in mind is the data minimization principle, which means that we have to collect as little personal data as possible, so our selection policy should target as little personal data as possible. And those data must be necessary to reach the objectives of archiving. And finally, for copyright, so as you might know, a copyright is automatically awarded to someone who has produced a work once it is expressed, so in a form of expression, and original. So it is very broad and it can cover a lot of different content. And so on social media, a lot of text, images, etc. will be protected by a copyright. And once an author has a copyright on some work, it has an exclusive right to give, to reproduce the content and to communicate it to the public, which means that to reproduce the content or communicate it, we have to ask for the author's authorization, which could be a bit tricky. So there are exceptions existing which prevent us from having to ask for the author's authorization, and some are applicable to archiving practices. Unfortunately, right now in Belgian law, the exception to the reproduction right, so to reproduce the content in the archives, does not apply to the archiving of digital content, which is a bit of an issue. And so it could be resolved very shortly in the adaptation of the law on legal deposit. But as of now, if we start to archive before the adaptation of the law, we have to ask for the author's authorization, so we should focus on accounts for which we can obtain such an authorization quite easily, for example, press editors or public institutions. Next, 4 recommendations for the preservation stage related to personal data protection. So, thanks to the derogatory regime from the GDPR, we avoid the storage limitation principle. So thankfully, we don't have to have a limit to the duration of preservation of personal data, which is quite useful for archives. There is also no need to pseudonymize the data at the stage of preservation because it would be contrary to the objectives of archiving practices, as the archives would not be complete. But that does not prevent the obligation to minimize the data we collect. Related to copyright, so this is the same as I said previously for the selection, but in order to reproduce the content in the archives, we currently have to still ask the author's authorization as long as the law has not been adapted. And finally, for access, so here regarding personal data protection, it's all about pseudonymization, so making sure that we need another document in order to identify the data subject whose information are in the archives. So we actually don't have a general obligation to pseudonymize everything that is in every personal data that is in the archives, because we benefit from exceptions for both the dissemination of personal data to unidentified people and for the communication of personal to identify third parties. But still, as we have to respect some appropriate safeguards, one of them is to pseudonymize some data on a case-by-case basis only when necessary and only at the access stage. And so one way to achieve this would actually be an easier way than to go through every archives and decide what to pseudonymize, is to automatically pseudonymize the usernames and profile pictures and other metadata that identify people, and just to wait for complaints to pseudonymize eventually other things. That seems to be the best way to do it. And so to do it, we also have to put in place an effective complaint procedure in order to make sure that people can actually complain if they have an issue with their personal data or private information being in the archives. And finally, regarding copyright, so giving access to protected work in the archives is a communication to the public. So in principle, it has to be authorized by the author. But here, fortunately, we have an exception for the archives, which is applicable to board digital content. The only issue, so we can give access to the archives even if they are protected works without asking for the authorization of the author. The only issue is that the communication is then limited to KBR's premises on dedicated terminals. So it, for example, cannot be done, cannot be communicated online, but we still have the option to ask for several different authors, such as press editors again and public institutions, to give a more extended communication to the public of the archives. That's it.
Thank you. So now over to the selection part. So for the selection of the BESOCIAL corpus, we first started with reviewing how this step was tackled internationally and in Belgium. And overall, we can conclude that the choices and different steps taken in social media archiving process are resource depending. So being not having time to explore social media archiving next to ongoing tasks within institutions, not having enough in-house knowledge, technical in-house knowledge, limited financial resources to, for example, switch over to commercial tools which can save you time, and also the whole legal framework which Lise-Anne just explained. Yeah, we can say that this evolution has happened at such a fast pace that it has been difficult for the law to keep up with the latest developments. So how are other institutions selecting their content? Internationally, we see that they mostly focus on Twitter as a social media platform, and that collections of accounts and/or hashtags focus on important people, organizations and events. And also, third thing, the priority is given to selective harvest. On a Belgian level, we concluded that Facebook is given most often the preference, followed by Twitter and Instagram. And this Facebook preference is driven by the thematic aspect. Organizations find that accounts they want to archive are most to be found on Facebook and not on Twitter and Instagram. So that's why. And we also noticed that the number of accounts and/or hashtags is well balanced between the number of social media platforms they choose. So in case one wishes to archive a very broad corpus, a lot of accounts and hashtags, organizations opt for fewer platforms and vice versa. And our findings show that most of the harvesting within Belgium is executed by means of open source tools with a focus on capturing the look and feel, so how a Facebook page really looks like. So here you can see how we translated our knowledge and the expertise that we got from the international and Belgian scope to the BESOCIAL scope. So within BESOCIAL, we select hashtags and accounts from the social media platforms, Twitter and Instagram, and we try to get data from Facebook as well, but it was technically very difficult, and then we decided, okay, let's stick with Twitter and Instagram. And the focus in BESOCIAL is on getting content, so textual data, and we try to be as representative and transparent as possible. However, our selection is done selectively, and we only collect publicly accessible data. Direct messages from Instagram, for example, are not collected. And the subject of the BESOCIAL scope is very broad, namely Belgian cultural heritage. So our approach, it's a dual approach, and initially the creation of the list of accounts and hashtags, also called seed list, was going to be an internal event, and during the course of the project we decided maybe it's interesting to also go for a two-way approach and to create the seed list for the collection. So a bottom-up approach and a top-down approach. So the top-down approach is executed by the BESOCIAL team via their expertise, their background, and also their network. And the output is a seed list. And then the bottom-up approach was carried out by the Belgian public. We set up a crowdsourcing for that in October 2021. And the output is as well a list of accounts and hashtags. So let's first dive a bit deeper into the top-down approach. Topic-wise, we focus on Belgian cultural heritage, which is very broad, and Belgium is a quite complex country with different languages and different beliefs, etc. So we decided within BESOCIAL to create our own definition of Belgian cultural heritage, and it covers, among others, movable, immovable, and intangible heritage. And here you can see some examples of the immovable, movable, and intangible heritage, like the last post, the Festival Rockwerchter, the real good Belgian fries, but also museums and het Rosbeert. And the following lists have already been passed on for harvesting, being COVID-19, literature, festivals, museums, heritage institutions, minority food, expat communities, and commemorations. So now dive a bit deeper into the bottom-up approach, being the crowdsourcing campaign. And the idea of the campaign arose around May 2021 because there are simply too many accounts and hashtags to archive and to select linked to Belgian cultural heritage, and the BESOCIAL team does not have the knowledge to list all of these events and all of the hashtags and all the accounts, and therefore we quickly suggested to set up a crowdsourcing campaign. And the spread of the word of the crowdsourcing campaign was done via a 45-second animation video. We used mixed media for that, and here you can see some stills of that video where the atomium is shown, and also Belgian fries and some other examples, and also some topics. And the animation was distributed via social media platforms, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, etc. And people who wish to add suggestions, accounts, can do so by clicking on the link, as well as adding their accounts and hashtags in the comment section at the bottom of the video. So the output of the crowdsourcing campaign was around 750 suggestions, with most of the suggestions linked to events happening at the moment, such as the Red Devils when they played, or a football group, and of course food, really important in Belgium, like the famous Cubedon fight in Ghent, but also other hashtags like Sprout to be Brussels. And we also found out that most of the suggestions were mainly hashtags and not accounts. And besides from this great output, we also received a lot of press attention for this campaign, where we could highlight the importance of social media archiving within the BESOCIAL project, but also within KBR and within Belgium, which was also a great way to promote social media archiving. So conclusions, recommendations, takeaways, I can say that selecting a broad corpus is very time consuming. And one way to solve this is maybe to hire job students or interns to support this selection procedure. But I can also say that maybe creating different strategies to broaden the selection scope of relevant content could be helpful, and this could be solved maybe by setting up an internal network of curators within the institution, and they can also suggest hashtags and accounts and topics, but also by setting up an external network of experts outside the institutions, stimulating collaboration within research groups and without research groups, and inviting recommendations from the public via crowdsourcing campaigns like we did. So this was a small recap of the selection scope that we used during the BESOCIAL project. I would like now to give the floor to Pieter, I think, and Eva to talk a bit more about the technical issues and how they solved it.
Okay. Yeah, so I will have some of your time to talk about the technical aspects. So first, we had a look at how we can harvest data from Twitter. For that, we used a tool called the Social Feed Manager that allows you to harvest the data, or specifically researchers and archivists to get social media collections. So not purely for Twitter, but we use it mainly for Twitter. That's one of the reasons why we picked it. Another reason is that it's open source. That means that people who want to contribute to the code can actually do that as well. And a third reason why we picked this is because it's free. So people who want to actually replicate what we have been doing can actually do that as well. Practically, we used it on the servers of Santal. That's where we deployed it. It uses the Twitter API to get all the data, and we created a specific BESOCIAL project and app to use the API because not everybody can just do it. We had to request why we wanted to have access to the API, what we were going to do with it. And it went pretty easy to get access, probably mainly because we told them that it was for research purposes and not commercial purposes. How we configured it is that every account and hashtag, so we had both options for hashtags and accounts, was that it would be harvested every week. We had a similar approach for Instagram. There we used an open source tool called Instaloader, which allows you to download the pictures and their captions and also their videos from Instagram using, again, hashtags or specific accounts. Again, we installed it on the servers of Santal together with the Social Feed Manager. The downside here is that we had to do a lot of things manual because Instaloader is a little bit more bare bones compared to Social Feed Manager. And the main reason for that is that Instagram doesn't offer an official API that you can use, but I will come back to that later. So a little bit about the results, what we were able to gather for the last part of the things that we harvested, the ones that Fien mentioned as well, is that for Twitter, we harvested almost 1,300 accounts and 650 hashtags, and it resulted in almost 3 million posts, and that's text only, resulting in 1.6 gigabytes, which is not that much, but that's because it's only text or mainly text for tweets. For Instagram, it was over 1,000 accounts and 11 hashtags, not that many hashtags, resulting in 27,000 posts that are actually both pictures and text, resulting in more storage. So that's 31 gigabytes here, and that's mainly because you're storing pictures, which is the main thing of Instagram, together with videos. Now with Instagram, as I alluded to in the beginning, there were some issues. So there is no official Instagram API that you can use. So the tool that we used, Instaloader, actually scraped the website of Instagram instead. One of the things that you can have there is that you have the risk that you're getting blocked when doing too many requests, because they can detect when it's not a human doing things, but actually a program doing clicks and downloads and so on. So to circumvent that, we introduced pauses between harvests so that it would look like that it's an actual human browsing Instagram. This works for a certain amount of time until it didn't, because apparently detected that as well, that it was not a human doing that, maybe because it's at midnight every time and so on. To circumvent that, there was another option to also include, or to actually log in with an existing account in Instagram. This also works for a certain amount of time until they also detect, oh, it's weird that one account keeps searching and browsing and downloading that many accounts, like weekly, monthly. So that was also resulting in problems. We also started experimenting with using a different IP address, which is like an identification of your machine that you're running the tools on. That was not so successful so far, but it's also a combination with the delays with the accounts, so that was not that easy to incorporate. So the lack of an official API for Instagram really makes archiving a lot more difficult. I mean, for Twitter, there's the API, you get some data, you don't get blocked, but for Instagram, they basically don't want any machines to scrape their websites or their apps and so on. So we can use some different tricks, but it's not guaranteed that they will work or that they will keep working. So what we did was actually did some filtering and some limitations on the accounts and the hashtags. That's why the number is a little bit lower than for Twitter. So we still managed to get like around 27,000 posts, but we had to deal with the limits that Instagram dictates us, unfortunately. And then I would like to Eva.
Once the data has been harvested, we have performed several technical steps. Among the steps, we can mention the arrangement of data, which means that we can add semantic information to the data, such as name entities, for example. To do this, we choose to use Spacy, a Python library for automatic language processing. We choose to train our own model and not to use existing model because while browsing the literature on the subject, we came across the work of Ritter et al. We showed that by training their own models, they were able to reduce the initial error rate by 41%. Actually, the existing models are trained on journalistic data, where a sentence starts with capital letter and end with period, and they don't work on our data because our data are noisy data. It deviates from journalistic data. Since tweets don't necessarily start with capital letters, end with periods, or contain an abbreviation. Indeed, given the limited number of characters, users are creative with the language, so we need to capture these originalities in our models. Then we had to store this data. To do this, we didn't use a traditional database, but we choose Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch is a free distributed search and analysis engine for all types of data. It works on an index principle, which is a collection of documents that are related to each other. We choose Elasticsearch for two main reasons. First, this tool was originally designed to support full text search and provides advanced filters to support search, such as tokenizer, token fighter, and analyzer. And we choose Elasticsearch for its speed. Elasticsearch is a near-real-time search platform, meaning the latency from the time a document index is very short. For the user interface, we integrated a project initiated by the Mill, a platform of UC Louvain, which today has become a collaboration between the two research centers. And we will continue after this project. This interface was created using several technologies, such as Laravel, a PHP framework for building web application, Chart.js, jQuery, and Formatic UI. Later in the presentation, we will show you this one and highlight its features. But in the meantime, here is a screenshot that shows you the search interface.
Yes, so I'm Eveline. I will tell you something more about the user requirement study we conducted during the BESOCIAL project. So first of all, we had a few goals that we wanted to obtain during this research. The first one being gaining insight into the needs and the requirements of a broad range of stakeholders that you can also see on the slide, being researchers, cultural heritage professionals, publishers, but also policymakers and other potential end users. And a second goal, we also wanted to understand how specific user requirements of potential social media archive users might eventually influence the adoption of such archives. So to do this research or to obtain these goals, we actually did research in 3 phases. After an initial desk research phase, we decided to have some qualitative semi-structured interviews with potential end users. And from this insights and takeaways from these interviews, we moved towards a conference workshop at the 2021 RESAL conference. And in this presentation, I want to highlight some of the results, or quickly highlight some of the results we obtained during these 3 phases. So during this first phase of desk research, we basically studied some user requirement studies that have been conducted in the past. And we specifically looked for the needs of potential users. And on this slide, I will mention some of the most important takeaways we had. So a first one being that awareness should be created around the existence of social media archives and also broader the web archives. The second one being the need for visualization tools. I also heard a question this morning about what kind of visualization tools exist. So this is definitely a need that we also encountered in the literature. But also the need for opportunities to nominate content for the selection. So this is also what we did during the call for hashtags and content within the KBR. A third takeaway we have is that there also is a need for documentation surrounding these selection policies and criteria, also improved tooling for search and analysis, and also more promotion, of course, of these social media archives. A fourth conclusion we found in the literature is that there is a requirement of providing more metadata to researchers, but also to develop furthermore some user-friendly and shareable tools that can be easily adapted to the different research needs, but also to different disciplines, and that also provides more clear information about copyright issues. And building communities that include both archivists and also researchers. So in the next phase, we decided to use qualitative semi-structured interviews to poll the needs and requirements. And in order to recruit these interviewees, you can see on the slide we have created 5 persona. These persona are some fictional characters that actually represent a kind of user type that might use a social media archive. We have found our inspiration for these personas in the Corpus project at the BNF in France, and also some personas created at the US National Archives. So based on these 5 persona, we recruited some interviewees, and on the slide you can see the interview guide that encompassed 3 main themes, being selection of policies, of content, then also consultation and involvement and support. I will then go to the next slide, where you can see our third and last phase of this user requirement study, where we hold a pre-conference workshop at the 2021 RESAL conference last year. And during this workshop, we asked participants to pick one of the persona that I just showed on the slide. And we asked the participants to reflect, discuss, and elaborate on the hurdles, but also on the opportunities that this persona would encounter when accessing and using social media data. So the results of this exercise you can find on the slide. You can see that we have also structured them a bit with regards to the hurdles and the potential solutions. So in the first phase, for example, in the orientating phase, this is the first phase when researchers go into the social or use social media content. We see that most of the personas, they are still having struggles with having the skills to cope with the selected content in the social media archives, and that they also have difficulties in understanding the legal deposit restrictions or the provided metadata categories. So as a potential solution to mitigate these problems, there was a suggestion to create a universal search interface over all the collection. There was also the suggestion that there could be some suggestions for tools to use, for example, to rehydrate your tweets, also producing small video tutorials or harmonizing the interface design and offering the same tools for each archive. In the auditing phase, we see that most personas encounter mainly practical issues, such as locating the single point of contact, or also semantical problems, experiencing, for example, some differences between concepts and also research words. Potential solutions we saw or we obtained from this workshop that included better displaying of information, better explanation of the articulation between tweet sets and the dataverse, also creating a common thesaurus or creating links to other web archives or link to a memento service to display the content. And then lastly, for the constructing phase, we unfortunately lacked the time to discuss this phase in an in-depth manner because there were so lively discussions in both of the groups. But nevertheless, some challenges were remarked by the participants, ranging from a lack of information of the collection to the need of searching in Chinese ideograms. In the case of a single persona, this was only mentioned, to also the problem that all data sets look separate in a social media archive, even when the archive probably has tweets in common. So this requires more work for potential users to download these several data sets, merge them, and remove duplicates. So although the results I just described are based on a small number of interviewees and the workshop, we believe they provide some interesting insights. The first one I already mentioned is the lack of awareness surrounding the existence of international social media archives. The second one, that often researchers are not aware of what web archives or social media archives exactly contain or how they can be used. Solutions could be to provide more metadata and provenance data of the archived collections, or links to papers, references to papers who are using this data. A third takeaway could be that in terms of selecting which social media content to archive and which not, we argue for a stronger inclusion of the academic field in the selection decisions and policies. So here we see that the KBR plays an important role and can play an important role for the future as well. Then as a fourth takeaway, we see that most interviewees agree on how the archived content should be queryable. So the idea that a classic interface to query the data is not sufficient for most of their research questions is obvious, so further development of interfaces is needed. And then last but not least, also a lot of participants agreed that one should aim to provide as much information on any given collection as possible. So this would also include references to certain methodologies or certain software or tool sets that can be used to archive the collection. This, for us, these were some very interesting insights. And I think you can see the QR code to read the full report on the user requirements, but it's also available on our VEO. So I will give the floor to the next speaker.
I will continue by presenting the search interface for the video collection web app that my colleague Eva was talking about. We can see first a simple search interface. We can search by keyword or by keyword phrase. We will just pick a word. Next, we have two mandatory fields. The first one is related to the communities. We currently have 4 communities, which refer mainly to the language used by the tweets, but can also be connected with the location. I will select for our demo the French-Belgian community. The second mandatory field is the type of the Twitter account. Here we have 3 possibilities, and we can make multiple choices. I will choose all these 3 types: politics, media, and population. We also have the possibility to add a request, if we are willing to do so, and we can also have the possibility to select a Boolean filter, and or. In this case, we will renounce to it. If we need advanced search options, we can look at the word form. So the default selection is the exact word form, but we can also choose an inflected form, and we also have the possibility to search by hashtag. Next, we can also select the start and the end date of the tweets that we are researching. We can include the retweets and the hashtags if we wish to do so, and we can also exclude a keyword or a key phrase based on our needs. We have the same option to choose the exact form, an inflected form or a hashtag for the exclusion as well. I will search for the word now. We can see at first our query, the filters that we have selected, and the total number of tweets. We also have the possibility to export the results. In this case, we will have to insert our email address and just click on send. We will receive an email with the possibility to download the data as a CSV, TSV, PDF, and other options as well. The word cloud that we are seeing next is actually showing named entities. We have 3 types of entities. We have persons, we have organizations, and we have locations. These are connected to the most important information about the tweets we are researching. We have also graphics. The first one is showing the top simple keywords related to our query. We can see all the words, or if we are interested to see a certain grammatical category, we can select it. The second graph is showing multi-words, and we can see that on top we have the war in Ukraine. An important feature of these graphs is that they are interactive. So if we want to narrow our search and we want to select only the war in Ukraine as query, we can click on it and the search is refined and the filter is added here. Next, we can see the top hashtags, the top mentions. We can also see information about the politicians producing these tweets and the pie charts with the parties that are producing them. And we have information about the media as well, the top publications that are related to the tweets, and a histogram. In this case, because I selected the war in Ukraine, we have only 2022, but this is actually adapted to the selection that you make for your tweets, according to what you want to see. We have also the possibility to see a data sample for the tweets. And here we have several types of tweets. And we can also see a context, a narrower context of the tweets if we wish to do so. There are currently several other functionalities that are being implemented in the interface, which is an interactive map and the search by name entities. And that would be all from me. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Delia, for this great demo. Access. Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so now it's my task to somewhat conclude this BESOCIAL project, which isn't the most easiest task to do. I think that we can say as a team that throughout the project we have learned a lot, and that we have learned a lot about the disadvantages and advantages of social media archiving, and that the advantages do prevail. And I also want to agree, and I think the team also agrees with me, that interdisciplinary teamwork pays off, and that we have learned a lot from each other, and that was really beneficial for this digital humanities project for BESOCIAL. And during the project, we worked towards 3 objectives. The first one being to analyze the state of the art of social media archiving. And there we found and concluded and could highlight that a lot of institutions and projects are archiving social media data, but they do vary in size and scope. And the second objective was to prepare and set up a pilot project for social media archiving, and also create a pilot for giving access to that data. And creating a social media archive, it depends on certain criteria, having the time to do it, having the budget to do it, but also having the legal framework to fall back on, etc. And all these things shape your social media archive, and that was exactly the case within BESOCIAL. And within BESOCIAL we found our own approach based to our needs and our user requirements and our requirements, technical and functional, to set up and prepare a pilot for archiving and giving access to social media data. And then we come to the third objective, being giving recommendations for a sustainable social media archive in federal Belgium. And there we wrote everything down that we found out during this entire project, but we also focused on the cost calculation and other reports, and everything can be found back on the Orfeo platform and also on the SODA platform that is linked on this presentation and probably will be shared in the chat online. So with BESOCIAL and small projects, we are making several steps to making born digital collections part of our national heritage, online national heritage. And I think now the main goal is to ensure that that knowledge is not lost, that we gain during this project, and that it can be transformed into a long-term vision for sustainable archiving and preservation of Belgian society and Belgian social media. I'm now pleased to hand over the floor to Sophie VANDEPONTSEELE, Head of Contemporary Collections at KBR, who will outline the future perspective of social media archiving within the walls of KBR, the Royal Library of Belgium.
Thanks, Fien. And indeed, the question is now, is the knowledge lost or not lost? The question is, what are now the next steps indeed? Obviously, we want to give this BESOCIAL project a sustainable future. It's very important for us. Several actions are already underway and other action will be taken. So I will explain what are the different actions. The first action is the adaptation of the legislation on the legal deposit. As you can see, to be able to archive the web, we must adapt the legislation on the legal deposit to allow KBR to harvest the Belgian web. It's one of the first steps. And indeed, we are currently in the process of the revising of the law and the royal decree. There is a law and there is also a royal decree relating to the legal deposit. This is a very long process. And we want to give priority to consultation with the various stakeholders, such as the publisher, the authors, the different kind of copyright management companies. It's very important to have this exchange discussion. And we also want to adapt the legislation more broadly to the challenge of digital age in general. In addition to be able to integrate the content of social networks, but also other web content, we defined the notion of web content as broadly and neutrally as possible. So here's the definition. Content made available to the public via electronic communication networks, including signs, signals, written material, image, sounds, or message of any kind. So we will, the project, the goal is include this definition in the legislation, in fact. Another question is the access to the web data. This is a new challenge as well. To meet this challenge, a new funding for a new project, the Belgica Web project, focusing on the development of a platform to access to Belgian web data was accepted. This is good news for research and for access to Belgian web data. The Belgica Web project focuses on opening up this born digital collection data in an accessible way so that the visitor of KBR can conduct research and KBR can facilitate text and data mining on this born digital collection. As I've just said, another important step for, perhaps the next slide, please. Oh, sorry. As I've just said, another important step for KBR is the launch of a public tender for the archiving of the Belgian web. We have, in fact, chose indeed for the solution of outsourcing the web archiving for the first 4 years. Why this decision? The reason why we choose to work with an external partner is that we want to create enough knowledge internally before we start archiving the web ourselves. And last but not least, the results of the BESOCIAL project were presented at the KBR Management Board, and the legal issue were explained. This is not an easy question. We also explain and present the different various possible scenarios for the social media archiving within KBR, and I have good news for. And it has been decided to include social media archiving in the public tender for web archiving. So this means KBR decided to embark on this new adventure.